It had only been a few months since he had seized the Ebony Throne, yet these constant rebellions from the unsatisfied lords were becoming obnoxious. He knew a certain amount of discontent was to be expected. It happened every time big changes were being put in place. But the sheer number of these little uprisings was becoming asinine. The one that he and his accompanying forces had just dealt with was a response to them lowering taxes for the poor to help increase their food surplus. You'd think it was the nobles losing income, but it was the common folk. They had launched a little uprising simply because they were getting fat and were upset about it. "Where's the next one?" Alex groaned, looking to his chief aide Icarus, a young vampire of little power but exceptional skill in all things. "Paperwork, South Bridgeton, my lord," Icarus replied, keeping a casual tone. Something Alex had specifically requested, having always despised anything too formal, likely due to his upbringing as a commoner. What's their complaint? It's not they want to be North Bridgeton despite being the most southern of the three. Towns? No, sir. Icarus paused as he reread the declaration from the town. They declare you are a false ruler who seized the throne through illegal means, and that they will resist a filthy human Dark Lord to their final breath. Oh, an actual complaint for once rather than a petty gripe. What have the scouts said? They report the lords have sealed themselves up in the western part of the town and abandoned the common folk. Collapsed the bridge, I assume? Icarus nodded to the question. Yes, sir. The few attempts to build a new one with forward forces have been blocked by them collapsing or dispelling any earth magic cast to make a new one. Any suggestions from the octagram? Move through Middle Bridgeton or build a bridge out of their reach, encircle them, and lay siege. I don't think I will. I grow tired of all these little fights. A display of power to those far from the capital when it was taken should do well. We shall march across the great chasm through South Bridgeton. My lord, I am aware. You are truly an unrivaled earth mage, but even with your skills, you will not be able to block them from dispelling your efforts. Too true, Alex nodded agreeably. I have a scheme brewing, though I will need to see the ground and, of course, offer them a chance to give up. Icarus nodded. Despite his boss's bloody reputation, he knew Alex would always give a Choki chance to surrender. Even if the offer was all but guaranteed to be rejected, even if he would endanger himself to make it, he would always give every chance at a peaceful outcome and attempt. We've arrived, my lords, the voice of the carriages driver announced. Exiting the vehicle, the pair came upon the eastern half of South Bridgeton. 3 such towns existed, bridging the gap of the bottomless chasm, a place said to reach all the way to the depths of hell. In all his experiences, even Alex did not know what was at the bottom. Though the times he had crossed the bridges, he had felt what could only be described as something primal below. The eastern half of the town was unremarkable, more of a small outcropping for the gate to the western half. Considering the 3 Bridgetons would be defensive positions in case of invasion, it made sense not to build as heavily on the side from which invaders would approach. So the road is paved with cobblestone, Alex muttered, tapping his foot. On the main road that led to where the crossing used to be. Yes, sir, to better allow trade into the Greedlands, I have been told. Makes sense. I remember when this was all gravel. Gods, I feel old now. Well, older. Alex muttered as he knelt and placed a hand on the ground. What are you doing, sir? Nothing much. I am just checking something I remember you mentioning in the past. So, shall we go greet our rebels? Alex asked, with what was now a signature manic grin. Continuing down the main road, the pair felt many watchful eyes of the residents who had been abandoned. It wouldn't be without precedence to burn the place to the ground just for their lords. Rebellion. Many Dark Lords that had ruled before Alex had used such tactics. Ignoring the gazes, though, Alex pressed on towards the end of the road, where a sheer rock face dropped out beneath them. Across the way, they could see a swarm of soldiers surrounding a plump orc in what, even from this distance, was clearly fine garb. Lord Bridgeton, I assume? Alex shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. Aye, I am he. Who are you? Another messenger? The orc replied, his voice amplified by some magic tool in his hand. Alex smirked at the question. No, I am the man whom you choose to disparage and call false. I have come to answer your challenge. Alex shouted back, only to reflexively hold out his staff and conjure a mana shield as a rain of crossbow bolts and arrows flew at him and Icarus. I refuse to recognize your rule, Lord Bridgeton roared as projectiles continued to pelt the shield. I don't need your consent to rule. I am giving you one chance to surrender. You and your immediate family shall be executed. But I guarantee the lives of the children. Come and try me, you human filth." At his response, Alex let out a deep sigh and stabbed his staff into the ground at the very edge of the chasm. "I thought as much, but I will always try." With a sudden, swift motion, he lifted his staff out of the ground, causing a metallic shing to echo as the shield grew in size, only for him to stab it back into the ground. "Know this, Lord Bridgeton, I shall march across this chasm tomorrow," he announced, clear for all to hear, as a metallic shing rung out once more as he drew his staff out of the ground only to stab it into the ground again, increasing the size of the shield so it now shielded the entire town from the west. "I shall march across it with my honor guard behind me and build a bridge you cannot dispel or break at a walking pace," Alex roared, stabbing his staff back into the ground one final time, leaving the staff in the ground. He turned his back to the force, still trying to shoot him. "You hear that, my guard? You, who are my most trusted and loyal soldiers?" The few hundred soldiers following quietly behind the pair roared in triumph, announcing they would follow him. "How are we going to do that, sir?" Icarus asked. He did not doubt that Alex would be able to do it. He was just curious about how. Simple, dear Icarus. "We shall build the bridge out of something they cannot destroy." "And that is, sir?" "Mithril," came Alex's confident reply. Icarus paused mid-step. Mithril would indeed be able to resist any attempt to damage it with magic. The problem is that building a bridge out of the material would cost an ungodly amount. Indeed, it was an amount a nation that had just started recovering from a civil war could not afford. Despite this, Icarus knew he would be in for a sight that history would love to retell. It was later in the evening, and most of the force had caught up and camped outside the town. They had made extra effort not to antagonize or even mistreat the locals, a direct order from Alex himself. "So, how are you going to make a bridge out of mithril, ya dumbass?" A voice that held no respect for her boss asked as she put muddy boots onto the table in front of her. Those present knew not to reproach her for her manner of speech, in part because she was the sinful Lord of Wrath, but mostly because she was known to be the closest friend of the Dark Lord. Anyone who tried to reproach her had long ago found out the Dark Lord himself would tell them off. "Simple you, we all know how mithril is made, right?" I don't," one of the officers said awkwardly, raising his hand. At this admission of ignorance, the Dark Lord's eyes lit up both figuratively and literally. You, however, just let out a long sigh. "You've triggered his teacher mode." "Yes, he has," Alex beamed. "Boy, you know the magical materials? Yes?" The officer panikedly nodded at suddenly being the very sole focus of the Dark Lord before him. "Yes, my lord. Mithril, adamantine, magicite, and orichalcum." Alex smiled and nodded. "Very good, boy. Do you know how they are formed?" The officer shook his head. Adamantine is formed where sheer force of will takes solid form. It is why it is found mostly around the Dark Continent. We are a very stubborn lot, and it naturally forms in the ground beneath us. Magicite, as I'm sure you can imagine from the name, forms in places of truly high magic concentrations. Orichalcum is actually an alloy of adamantine and mithril. "And mithril, my lord?" the officer asked. "Faith," came Alex's casual reply. "It's why the theocracy has such a monopoly on the stuff. So you will build a mithril bridge with faith, in a way? If I use earth magic infused with enough faith, well, I can create mithril," Alex explained. "And how will we do that, my lord?" a general asked. "At a walking pace, no less," Icarus added. "Easy. The men of my honor guard shall march in formation. They shall play the marching drums in a fun, rhythmic fashion, as Gaia is fond of music. This will enhance my earth magic further." "I do not see where you'll get the faith from, Alex," Yu asked, finally sitting up straight with a fascinated grin. "Simple. What is the most powerful form of faith?" "I'm not a student, Alex. Don't just throw riddles at me and speak straight." "You're no fun," Alex said with a pout. "Very well. The men shall be blindfolded as they march across the chasm. They shall have blind faith in my ability to build the bridge as they march. But if you do that and fail, they shall fall to their deaths," the general protested. "Worry not. I shall be some 30 paces ahead of them. If it fails, the only one who dies is me." "I must protest, sire," the general begged. "To lose you would be the worst outcome. Please do not joke about such an event." Fine, I get it." But I was serious. We shall march down the main road. They shall be blindfolded and playing drums. I shall be at the forefront, using my staff's shield to keep them safe while I use my magic to form a bridge. Well, I'm sold. I want a front row seat to this show. I'll be on the front line of the forces. Need someone who can see to keep them in line, Yu declared, thumping her fist onto the table, knocking over a few of the drinks on it. But sire, the general pleaded, only to see nothing would move Alex. Icarus rested a comforting hand on the general's shoulder. Worry not, General. He is entirely mad, but he's not stupid. Yes, it was the morning of the march, and Icarus had been roped into the Honor Guard's march simply to help keep them on track. True to his word, Alex had gotten his most loyal soldiers to blindfold themselves after they got into positions outside the town. "Soldiers, are you ready?" Alex's voice boomed. In response, the soldiers stomped their feet 3 times. "Begin the drums and march at a steady pace. Let the guides keep you on track." Icarus could feel his heart pound as a few hundred drums began to beat in a matched rhythm. The Dark Lord he had sworn to follow was ahead of the force some 30 paces. The man was already bobbing and weaving back and forth in some manic dance. The force continued down the cobblestone road, passing baffled onlookers. Icarus's belief in Alex began to waver as they continued to march forward. How would he ensure that the men's faith was not wavering, either? Would their faith be enough? As they continued forward, something odd seemed to catch Icarus's eye. Had someone moved it? Alex's staff, which had been at the very edge of the chasm, was now some 30 paces away from the edge. "We are almost there, men!" Alex shouted as he pulled his staff from the ground, causing a metallic shing to echo again. It was now. The scheme Alex had concocted started to take shape in Icarus's mind. When the men watched yesterday, Alex had made a very big show about his staff making that ringing noise. Enough that the idea that ringing sound would be where the edge would start. Only it wasn't. So even the men whose hearts wavered would find solid ground where they expected to find the chasm. Icarus had to admire the sheer trickery of what Alex was doing. Something he was sure the god Loki would thoroughly approve of. Any doubt, any little sliver of doubt any of the men had, would vanish when they stepped past the point. Only there was still no bridge ahead of them. 30 paces away, long past. The point. He could see nothing appearing. 20 paces and still nothing. Alex was still walking forward, but the man was prodigious with his air step, so it was not something he could fully rely on. 10 paces and Icarus kept his heart solid. Blind faith wasn't the only thing that could create mithril. He would believe in his boss, his master, his friend. Sadiismdurdi. Lord Bridgeton watched from the edge of his castle's balcony, looking down the main road on the other side. He had started his little rebellion partly because he genuinely could not stand the idea of a human ruling him, but mainly to get reduced. Taxes. It was a typical little tactic nobles used. Stir up trouble, complain and surrender, and get a few benefits to behave. He had heard of the new Dark Lord's reputation for mercy, and knew his empty bluff from the previous day was just that. A bluff. The idea of building a bridge out of mithril itself was laughable. Only as he looked down at the chasm could he hear a deep drumming beginning to boom out. "Marching drums," Lord Bridgeton assured himself. "Nothing to worry about. They will make a show of marching around and then make a fresh offer." The drums grew louder as they approached. Still, he did not doubt that it was all a show, even when his grandfather had begged him not to proceed. With the plan, weeping like a fool, he asked him to beg mercy from this Dark Lord. "They are all blindfolded?" he muttered confusedly, finally spotting the force marching down the main road. "We are almost there, men," the human Dark Lord announced while still far from the edge. Lord Bridgeton let out a sigh of relief. He had actually let himself think for a moment they would keep marching. Only a moment, though it was laughable to... His mirth faded as the blindfolded soldiers did not stop. "Is he mad?" he muttered under his breath as the soldiers continued, not slowing their pace. "Ha, he will march them to their deaths. Ha 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 ha." The Lord broke out into laughter at the sight of it. Only his laughter faded as a reflection of the morning sun beamed into his face. Shielding his eyes, his breath caught in his throat. The glimmering, pure silvery sheen of metal shone out as an ornate bridge began forming under the Dark Lord's feet as he led the way. "Mithril," was all he could mutter as the soldiers finally stepped onto the bridge behind their leader. Soldiers who did not slow down nor turn away. Soldiers marching towards his... "Send the mages and dispel the bridge," the Lord barked, only to see the hopelessness in the eyes of his mages. "It cannot be done, my lord. The mithril would resist our magic." "Archers, shoot them as they march!" The Lord's panicked order was obeyed only for the shield that had blocked them the day before, the staff letting the shield move before the soldiers. Every bolt and arrow hit the wall of magic and fell limply into the chasm below. "He is over halfway, my lord," one of the mages shouted. "I can see that," the Lord cried out in response. It was an empty threat. "He is weak, merciful, and human. He wouldn't make good on his threat the previous day, would he?" the Lord asked, but he received no response from the terrified-looking members of his family who had, till this moment, been somewhat hopeful for the scheme's outcome. "Should we flee the town, my lord?" a servant suggested. "They would shoot us in our backs. Besides, the new greed is entirely loyal to that monster. We have nowhere to run." "Then what can we do?" the Lord's eldest son asked. "Victory or Valhalla," came the Lord's terse reply as he removed the ancestral family sword from above the fireplace. "Victory or Valhalla." Miagitiadien Mapoir Quaimware, the events that occurred this Mainihacho day became known as the Bridgerton Miracle. It was said the 13th Dark Lord of the Shadow Empire built a bridge of an impossibly valuable and strong material at a walking pace. The reporter explained to a camera, "While undoubtedly apocryphal, the bridge that still stands to this day is still celebrated annually. The festival, which takes place over 2 days, ending with a recreation of the ritual that supposedly made the bridge. Where the townsfolk dress up and march across blindfolded, this is Blake Bridgerton reporting from the town with my family's name. Back to you in the studio." Enjoy next story. The envoy from the theocracy looked out the carriage window as it drew up the road towards Hades' seat, capital of the Shadow Empire, and the place where the current Dark Lord dwelt. Slowly but surely, the carriage turned around a central fountain with artistic reliefs before stopping before a pair of imposing black metallic doors. The door to the carriage opened with a click as a werebeast butler opened it for him. He could tell it was such a creature due to the slitted irises, though what manner of creature it would become was beyond him. It was said some of the cardinals could tell at a glance, but he was a mere bishop. "We welcome the envoy from the theocracy," the butler said, offering a bow. Looking around, the bishop was disappointed by how few people there were to welcome him. He was a highly ranked member of the theocracy, here on a diplomatic mission. Anything less than a grand welcome would be an insult, though to expect anything from savages was probably too much. "A light welcome, I see," the bishop said hastily. "By order of his most august majesty, sir," the butler explained, offering a second bow. He said not to roll. "Out the welcome party for someone such as yourself." Taken aback by the admission from the creature, the bishop held his tongue. It would be one thing to do such in front of his retinue with other witnesses, but here, with no one but the Dark Lord's men, they could spin the tale any way they wished. "Very well. Tell your owner I am here." It was the werebeast's turn to be taken aback before recovering his own composure. "I shall not need to, sir. He is already awaiting your arrival with eager anticipation. Please follow me," he explained, gesturing towards the doors that were now opening. Walking into the main chamber, he held back how impressed he was from showing on his face. For a nation of backwards races and primitives, the artwork here was enough to deck the halls of the great temple where the angel Vespasia resided. "Here we have the Hall of 1,000 Mirrors, installed during Hades' reign," the butler offered, as he turned down a hallway lined with the most ornate and perfectly cleaned mirrors he had ever seen. He had at most seen a hand mirror of this quality that wasn't just polished metal, but these were truly masterful. "Dwarven make?" he asked, thinking of all the pathetic races this nation allowed to call home their most industrious could produce them. "I believe they are from the Academy workshops, if I recall correctly, sir." This answer filled the bishop's heart with pride. While the Academy was now a den of beasts and under-races, it had been founded and run by the first hero of humanity, a man whose fall was not well recorded, only that he went off to face the first Dark Lord alone. "We are at the throne room, sir. The Dark Lord Helshep has agreed to meet you alone. I have been asked to advise you to speak as freely as you wish. Treat him with contempt should you so wish it." Trying his best not to let the confusion show on his face, he stepped through the doors to the throne room. The room was rather austere compared to the rest of the palace he had passed through. The pillars were for function, not form. Even the throne at the end of the room seems rather plain, a simple wooden chair with a black gemstone on its headboard. Looking around the room, he could not see the man he had been sent to deliver a message to. However, he hoped that he would receive a positive response. After all, he was the first human to ascend to the Ebony Throne. Granted, he was centuries old at this time, but the theocracy was willing to overlook extending life with magic so long as it ultimately served the gods. "Hello," he ventured, still peering around the room but finding no one. "What you got there?" a playful voice asked as it snatched the sealed letter from his hands before slinking away. "Hey, that is for the Dark Lord's eyes only, fool!" A lanky-looking man in a simple, albeit slightly ragged suit stood before him, eyeing the letter in his hands as the bishop reached out to grab it, but the man moved away from his reach with a grace that did not match his figure. What an important-looking seal. "Did the angel send this one?" the fool asked as he continued to skip and move out of the bishop's grasp. "No, it was the Council of Cardinals. Now return it, or there shall be trouble," the bishop snarled. "Trouble?" the fool asked, tilting his head. "Yes, now get your master, and we shall discuss its contents." "Ah, yes. It is for Dark Lord Hellshep, right?" the fool asked as he walked over to the Ebony Throne. The bishop had heard of the throne in many tales, that it only ever allowed one master, that any who so much as grazed it other than a Dark Lord would be turned to dust. "Give me a moment, and I shall read it," the fool said as he slumped into the throne and broke the seal. "You are Hellshep?" The fool on the throne went as he looked over the page he was reading. "Oh yes, the one and only, Dark Lord and ruler of the Shadow Empire, blah blah blah. I have so many titles, I actually have a book just listing them out, so why don't we stick with my favorite title, one my youngest daughter gave me?" "And that would be?" the bishop asked. As with any diplomat, part of his mission was to gather information. "The King of Titles, a great title for one with so many," Hellshep chuckled before continuing to read the letter. The bishop tried his best to read his face, but contrary to most other rulers he had met, this man wore too many emotions to gather his mood. "So, this letter is the deal?" Hellshep asked. "Yes," the bishop replied. "You are aware of its contents, I assume?" "Yes, I was involved in the meeting when they penned it, though I have spoken it to no one. Tell me, O bishop." Hellshep rolled his hand, to which the bishop promptly responded. "Hellbrand, sir." "Hellbrand? Interesting name. So tell me, Bishop Hellbrand, are you disliked over there? In the theocracy, I mean?" "Disliked," Hellbrand echoed, confused. As far as he knew, he was a rising star with growing influence and plenty of friends. "No, sir." "Then are you a fool?" "A fool!" Hellbrand bit his tongue to hold back a wave of insults he had for this man who had ignored all etiquette for meeting a diplomat. "It's just, the theocracy wants me to legalize slavery in exchange for lasting peace." Hellbrand nodded. The Council of Cardinals agreed that it was such a simple and agreeable offer that only a madman would reject it, especially since their evidence suggested that Hellshep was born and raised in the Secondian Kingdom, a nation built on slavery. "And the alternative is war?" "Sadly, yes," Hellbrand nodded. "It's just, do you know of the foundation stones of the Empire?" Hellbrand shook his head. It was something he had never heard even a whisper of. "I see it makes sense, then. You see, when the Empire was founded, the Dark Lord Hades gathered the 7 sinful lords to aid him." "This I know," Hellbrand replied, nodding along. They each set a rule that could never be broken by any successor. The rules were such that they were flexible enough to shift, but ultimately wouldn't be broken. Now, further history, do you know what gluttony's one rule never to be broken is? "No, I do not," Hellbrand replied, shaking his head. "Well, you see, this land was founded by misfits, outcasts, and runaways from the other continents. We are people unwanted by all others, so we forged a paradise out of a volcanic wasteland. It is a land that values the rights of freedom and autonomy. Gluttony, being an orc from a race often enslaved, set his unmoving rule to be no slaves. It is why slave ships that go through our waters are captured, and the enslaved people are offered a place to live." I was unaware," Hellbrand replied, unsure of himself now. "But you grew up in the Secondian." Hellbrand's plea was cut off before it could even be finished. "I was a peasant in that land. We saw how the slaves were treated, and it disgusted us. but we had little right to do anything to help them. What? Of the slave mines or the debt slaves? Hellbrand asked, clutching at straws. The ones working the mines are criminals working hard labor. Once their sentences are served, they are free to go. Not to mention their rights are maintained during their punishment. The debt slaves, as you labeled them, are protected even more and must receive a fair wage that once their debt is repaid, they are free to do as they wish. During that period, they can even change employers. So, I am left with a quandary here. Hellbrand? Oh, you see, if I let you go home unaccosted for this slight, not only to me but our very founding principles, it'll not look good to my people. However, if I killed you in a most terrible manner, it would start a war. Hellbrand could feel a lump forming in his throat, around which words refused to form. So, I am going to ask you questions. You are going to be entirely honest with me. Any lie, I shall accept the war option. Is that understood? Hellbrand nodded vigorously. So first, I shall ask again, are you disliked in your homeland? Because it seems to me sending someone to deliver this message would likely end in death. Hellbrand shook his head. He honestly did not know who could have set him up. Okay, you don't know. Understood. Next, are you a fanatic? By which I mean, are you willing to die for your cause? Hellbrand again shook his head desperately. No? Good. I loathe nothing more than fanatics. I have to keep telling my Imperial Guard to protect the people before they protect me, but they just won't listen. Okay, last question now. I know you are a fool messenger who does value life. Hellbrand asked, looking at Hellshep, hoping for any mercy. Which hand is your dominant hand? The one you write with? The one you drink with? The one you cannot bear to live without? I believe I have a way to satisfy both parties. Because, Hellbrand, I may be a king of monsters, but I am still more human than your masters. I love the land that accepted a down-and-out orphan from a no-name village. To betray their morals would be to betray myself, and I shall commit no treason on this day. Stepping off the throne, Hellshep approached Hellbrand and knelt before him. Bringing him to eye level, Hellbrand hadn't even noticed he had fallen to his knees. So, right or left? Enjoy next story. I greet the reader once more, and am pleased that you have returned to read more of my accounts of Flash, the man who knew only fear. It has been some time since I wrote one of these entries, mainly because the tax office keeps pestering me for more chapters with threats of a tax audit if I fail to add to their records. Being of sound mind, I have decided to add more to the archive despite the Ministry of Truth's attempts to censor me. The tax office instills a more profound fear in me than they do, but I am left with the struggle of which tale to share. As Tax Officer Malcolm has commented, my accounts are sporadic and lack continuity. So, in an attempt to avoid an audit, I will pick up where I left off with my last account, where Flash and I were stranded in a desert foxhole, a dozen cellular disruptors of the 2,547th Plotis Regiment aimed squarely at our heads. We had come to this planet in an escape pod which, in a drunken stupor, we had wisely decided would be a good place to play Press the Buttons. A game that you will see was played often enough that it is now in military training manuals under the Flash Gambit. The idea that our dumb luck is now considered a viable option for quick deployment is disconcerting for a scholar such as myself. However, I digress. We had a dozen scary-looking guns pointed at our heads. My head. Did they shoot us already? Flash asked with a groan, no doubt feeling a hangover equal to mine. I don't know. But can we at least address the situation first? I pushed back, trying to keep my eyes in my skull as they felt liable to escape. Such was my hangover. You dare, great flashy Haman. Why have you invaded Aus? What I assumed to be the Plotis captain demanded in his thick accent. Ah, Flash slurred, trying but failing to stand up. You have heard of me. The great Captain Flash, he declared, flaring his cape and falling over as he lost his balance. Dizun is the great Flash? The captain nearly squeaked in shock. Der other must be the cowardly Scala. I personally did not care about my reputation in the galaxy. Trailing behind Flash, an actual coward, gave one a great perspective on how far such people could go. I simply bowed to the man. Pleasure to meet you. Why is yous here, den? Is you here for der secret talkin'? Me and Flash shared a look that said 1,000 words. Well, not 1,000 more. like 2 with some punctuation. Secret talks? Huddling close together, Flash, in a hushed tone, began to whisper in my ear. Hey, bud, these guys are our only way off this rock, right? I glanced at the now totaled escape pod we had taken here and nodded. He then said words I would hear way too often. Okay, follow my lead. Balling his fists, Flash put on his most disarming smile, one practiced through countless years of bullshitting his way through life and getting out on top somehow. Why, yes, we are here for the secret talks. As you can see, the landing pod that allowed us to arrive unnoticed by... He paused to glance around, despite being surrounded from all sides, before shielding his mouth conspiratorially. Undesirable attention. We have, however, been sent off. Course, no doubt, by those that wish our attendance at such talks to be stopped. I held back a snort of derision, as the forces that caused our current situation were before the Plodes, and were more than likely still half drunk. The captain nodded sagely as he gestured to a few of his men to help us out of the foxhole and into their transports. It must be said that when your head feels several sizes too small for the brain to inhabit it, the feeling of air-conditioned transport on a desert planet is euphoric. So, what's the plan then? I asked Flash, who was enjoying the cool air. The usual, I guess, he replied with a shrug. Bullshit till either they make you king, or we are running from concentrated gunfire. Flash blanched at the suggestion of violence. He was very much a fan of the former outcome rather than the latter. If I had a credit for every time a planet offered kingship to Flash, I'd have 2 credits, and I'm sure we all know the rest. Of that saying, it speaks to how stupidly fate weaves around him that it happened more than once. I would prefer we get off this rock before any talks begin, Flash replied, his eyes panickedly darting to the Plodes soldiers in the vehicle. With us. So where are we heading? I asked one of the soldiers, who scoffed at me. I see that der great Flash has not told in you. The soldier I asked said with a smug grin, We are heading to Da Grand Bazaar. At these words, Flash and I shared a sudden look of realization. The Grand Bazaar was the greatest market in the galaxy, a place where anything and everything could be bought, a place where trade deals that would affect entire sectors of the galaxy were made, so we will need help getting transport off the planet. It should be very easy for you to Flash stopped as he felt the jolt of my elbow in his ribs, followed closely by my glare. While he wanted off this rock, if a secret deal was being made, we would regrettably have to attend to ensure humanity wasn't affected in any way. By which I mean, for after the talks? His question was aimed at me, but thankfully went unnoticed by the soldiers. The soldier just smiled. We shall be happy to be helping you. The journey to the Grand Bazaar was uneventful, minus one small encounter with a desert behemoth, usually a city-devouring monster, but as the soldiers got into position, Flash stumbled out of the vehicle and perfectly knocked an anti-space cruiser rocket launcher out of the truck. As has happened in the past, Flash's odds-defying luck was in full force, and the rocket went right down the creature's gullet, effectively one-shotting it. Flash, who was oblivious to his feat at the time, simply said to the troops, Come on, gents. Let's get going. We don't have time to waste on that thing. It must have looked heroic to the soldiers that the man they were escorting so casually took out such a monster. If only they knew his voice as well as I did. If only they knew he meant, crap, 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 let's run away. Let that thing be someone else's problem. As a side note, I understand that the beast's meat significantly boosted several depleted local food stores, another accolade for Flash added by sheer happenstance. So we arrived at the palace of the Sultan of the Grand Bazaar and were warmly welcomed. It seemed Flash's fumbled heroism had been radioed ahead, as he was already at a higher status than he had been when we crashed on this rock. I welcomed such a distinguished, heroic guest, and slave, he asked, glancing my way. Scholar, I corrected, to which he nodded dismissively before focusing on Flash. So, you are here for the trade discussion. I was unaware that humanity had been invited. Forgive my rudeness and ignorance. Only, as a professional politician, could Flash let the bullshit flow through him? Think nothing of it, Sultan. I am here to make sure humanity's interests are kept safe. I nodded approvingly as he glanced back at me, indicating he had done as we had rehearsed. Come, follow. The talks are ready to start. The Sultan said with a smile as he guided us through his palace to a large chamber lined with tables and chairs. There were only a scant few races present. But those who were there were the craftiest and most skilled financial movers in the galaxy at that time. We begin this division council to decide who will hold sway over galactic sectors, 456 through 597. These words sent a chill down my spine, as they would include human territories. For once, I was thankful for Flash's odds-defying luck. Humanity would have been ruined had we not known of these talks. The discussions began with every race present, arguing and threatening open war to claim total control over the focused sectors. If anything, this was a relief. They seemed more concentrated on kneecapping each other so that any monopoly that could be established would collapse the second another saw an opening. If only I hadn't forgotten who I was there with. For the briefest of moments, I did not notice Flash standing up. By the time I did, he only looked back at me as he winked. Never a sign of anything going as I would have hoped. Ladies, he swung his hand in a gesture that would appear graceful to anyone. Gentlemen, again he swung his hand across the room, drawing all attention to himself. For all his cowardice, he was, at the very least, skilled at being the center of attention. And beings of indeterminate gender, can we not just get along? The whole room fell silent as they all looked at this utter dumbass standing in front of them. These beings threatened to glass a planet a few moments ago because they had a 0.01% taken off their stock. Shares, and Flash was acting like it was a schoolroom argument. Why don't they get along? Flash, please sit back! My hushed words to pull him back were interrupted by a booming roar from the Lixios representative, a large bipedal snake-like race that, even today, people believe is secretly running humanity. Gra! You would suggest we make peace and unify human Flash, his roaring voice bellowed. Immediately recoiling in what was apparent to me to be fear, Flash meekly nodded. Yes, I do. One of the greatest heroes to rise out of the simple race known as humanity is the man known as Captain Flash. He lived up to his title by being the most daring and shining example of humanity's exemplary nature. He was said to be a man who only knew fear, as he often saw it in the eyes of his foes. A man who stood unmoving in the face of a charging skyscraper-sized Placidarex, staring it down such that it stopped in its tracks. Who brought down a band of Cloxium warlords with only a few sentences. This humble historian and friend of the man reports that his exploits are not in any way exaggerated. He achieved all the above and so much more, but it is the nature of things, that his stories are more interesting without the Ministry of Truth's input. So please allow me to elaborate on how the most feared and revered human had a perception of him warped beyond compare. First, let's address the event mentioned above involving the Cloxium warlords. This account will be taken directly from my personal records, which they could not redact. This is mostly because the records were concealed in a place even the Ministry of Truth does not wish to delve for fear of incurring the wrath of a far greater entity, the tax office. It began when I knocked on the door leading to Flash's bedroom. My intention at the time was simply to wake the man who had gotten incredibly drunk after seeing the almost dinosaur-like aliens we were here to ostensibly form diplomatic relations with. If such a thing were possible, though, I could not at the time see how such would be done. Flash himself seemed even more dismayed, as cries of terror were all that responded when I thumped my fist against the door. Cries of "go away" and "you've seen those things, right? They are fucking terrifying." Well, he was not wrong, and even though I had had nightmares the night before, we were here representing our race. Flash, seriously, come on. Out. I have some millennia-aged whiskey if you do, I called out luringly, knowing that it would be the carrot that would get this ass out of his bedroom. And I can drink it? Came his weak reply, muffled by the titanium plate door between us. Yes, I promise. You can drink this whiskey that cost more than my home if you come out and meet with the nice big scary aliens. The carrot seemed to work as the door clicked, indicating that the locks had been released. Now the carrot had gotten the ass to open up was time for the stick. I burst into his room before he could snatch the bottle and re-engage the lock. With me now in front of him, this man, the very pinnacle of warrior amongst humanity, looked terrified. He looked liable to wet himself, and I was just a scholar attached to this whole adventure. For all his fame and pomp, the man was an unrepentant coward. He did little to hide his cowardice and made every effort to avoid responsibility, yet he seemed to somehow never be spotted for who he was. How he avoided the firing squad defied logic and probability. On one occasion, I watched the man say directly to a unit of conscripts, "You are going to be my meat shield. I know I will get really drunk while you keep me safe." By some sheer miracle, the microphone and sound system chose that very moment to malfunction. So instead of the above, the conscripts heard, "You are my shield. I know I will keep safe." The soldiery believed the malfunction cut out the word "you" from the end rather than the whole horrid thing. However, I digress. I had been able to force the ass into his uniform and dragged him to the meeting chamber, only stopping right before the door. Maintaining a vice-like grip on his shoulders to ensure he would proceed forward, we pressed on into the chamber. Upon seeing the Cloxium warlords, Flash began to resist my push with all his might, a might that was thankfully non-existent due to his overindulgent lifestyle. Flash saw no escape now. The hungry eyes of a dozen predators with enough military might to ravage the human sector were squarely on him, so he coughed to clear his throat. Ahem! And again, ahem! And once more, ahem! I have known the man long enough to know he genuinely was trying to clear his throat. But to all in attendance, it seemed he was calling for all attention to himself. "I offer my warmest greetings, and thank you for your hospitality, visiting lords," he declared in a soft voice. A voice that was so soft he would not have been heard if it were for vocalators being connected for the means of translation. "I am sure you have heard of me, the famed Captain Flash," Flash declared, flaring up his gaudy cape covered in mirrored tiles. A murmur of recognition spread across the Cloxium present as they looked at the man shaking in his boots under their gaze. "I am here to ask for peace," he declared, now visibly shaking. A sign of weakness before such aliens would have been the end for any diplomat. But this is Flash. The man really does defy probability. I really should take him gambling one of these days. The largest of the Cloxium warlords stepped forward, staring down Flash, who was no doubt moments away from actually wetting himself. A loud, ear-splitting, guttural snarl escaped the creature's mouth, which took a moment to translate fully. "We will accept all terms humanity wishes to impose." Like that, Flash, with only a few sentences, somehow secured what was thought impossible. The Cloxium promptly left, and even to this day, honor the treaty they demanded to be named after Flash. Another accolade given to the man who defies probability. Now, this account may surprise those of you who have read the official account. After all, I've just relayed that what he said is not what is reported in the official report. Well, that is because of two things. First, my report was deemed unreliable due to my purchase of said millennia-aged whiskey. They assumed I must have been drunk and misreported what was said. The second and most important thing is what the Cloxium warlords reported during the meeting, as their perception of the whole meeting was entirely warped. I do not doubt due to some weird reality-bending luck that surrounds the ass I call a friend. When we entered the meeting chamber with me pushing him, they did not see it as me forcing him into the meeting. Quite the opposite. They saw a warrior boldly marching into their midst with a lowly scholar trying to hold him back and failing. Seeing him stand before them, shaking supposedly with the need to rip and tear them to pieces, wowed them. Then he began his speech. The funny thing about this is that the Cloxium language isn't as open and fluid as ours, so the translators had to compensate for the words they couldn't comprehend. So when Flash said, "I offer my warmest greetings and thank you for your hospitality, visiting lords," what their translators relayed to them was, "I offer to burn you in greeting and thank your medical centers, visiting lords." This is a very interesting and strong opening line, especially for a race as militaristic as the Cloxium. As Flash flourished his cape, it by sheer chance resembled the only predatory animal on their homeworld, a large, shiny, bird-like creature that hunted Cloxium young. So, when he let his ego get a little boost by saying he was sure they had heard of him, they made the immediate unstated parallel they believed he was making, that a man with his reputation was the same as the beast that instilled fear in them as hatchlings, that he was the predator and they were prey. Ironically, his next line helped settle their decision. "I am here to ask for peace." The Cloxium language has no word for ask nor peace. Asking is a weakness in their eyes, after all, so their translators did the best their little AI could manage and relayed. I'm here to demand surrender." Following an open threat from a man with his reputation, even the warlike Cloxium doubted themselves. To be honest, I am sure if they did try to attack him, some utter fate-defying bullshit would come out of left field. Regardless, due to a translation error, Flash got to continue on. We ended the evening drinking the whiskey I had bought on Flash's credit. So we ended up so drunk we were barely aware of anything happening. That is till we woke up in a foxhole with guns of the famed 2547th Plotis Regiment aimed at us. Yet another famed event from Flash's storied career of dumb luck. End of excerpt. From Tax Rebate Claim Explanation Form D124 Alpha, taken from the What the Hell Is This archive? Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.